Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gloucester Reads discussion group. And my name is Dawn Pratson, and this is Michelle McCaffrey. We'll be your facilitators. We'll be using a script pretty tightly to kind of keep it consistent across our groups. Thank you for being here on time. The Gloucester Racial Justice Team, in partnership with the Sawyer Free Library, Gloucester Health Department, and the other community organizations, welcome you to this Gloucester Reads discussion group. The mission of the Gloucester Racial Justice Team is to create a safe and welcoming city where everyone who lives or visits here feels that they belong. We would like to thank Essential Partners and Gloucester Conversations for their help in planning this discussion group. We would also like to thank the 1623 Studios. The purpose of this discussion group is to allow people to reflect on their own experiences in response to how the word is passed, and to hear other people's experiences and responses. It is also to create a safe space so we can learn together without blame how to root out the biases we have all grown up with. Our overall plan, we're going to do a little ice-breaking introduction for everyone, and then we'll talk about our guidelines for the discussion, get your input on that. And then we have 2 questions we're going to ask you and give you plenty of time to think about and respond. So thank you so much for volunteering to do this. It's really appreciated. And now I'm going to pass to Michelle.
Echoing Dawn, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're going to take a moment to think about a specific situation. We're going to go around, take turns sharing. The situation is, imagine that you find yourself at noon one day and have nothing, and you're free of obligations for the rest of the afternoon. How do you choose to spend your time, and what does that say about you? We're going to take a minute to think, and then whoever's ready, they can start off, and then we'll go around after that.
I'm ready.
All right.
I'm not sure if this is on.
Go ahead, Bob. I think it is.
Oh, it is on.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm retired. I've been retired for almost 3 years
Start with
to
your
the
name.
day. Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Bob Gillis. I retired as president of the Cape Ann Savings Bank 3 years ago, almost to the day. And I feel very fortunate to have had that job, and feel very fortunate in my life in general. And so I'd like to spend a lot of my time serving in whatever capacity it is. And so if it's noontime and I'm looking for something to do, I'll probably sign up for a shift to deliver food for Open Door, or deal blackjack at Seacoast Nursing Home, or whatever it is. But service is important to me, and it's a small way of giving back. So.
Thank you, Bob.
Hi, I'm Peggy. I'm the executive director at Action Inc., a local nonprofit that provides a range of programs. So if it's a non-work day and I have nothing to do after 12, most likely I would probably walk with my dogs in the woods, and my husband and my daughter, who's a young adult who may or may not be willing to come with us. But I think I would do that because I feel like I work a lot and I'm inside a lot, and so when there's time to just be out in nature without the phone, that's what I would do.
Awesome. Okay.
Oh, hi, Ben Lummis. I'm the superintendent of schools for the Gloucester Public Schools. A summer weekend, if I'd had lunch, then I would take a nap. Okay.
Nice.
If I didn't take a nap, then I have a Diet Coke, and then I would go for a walk. My wife and I live in Gloucester. Our kids live far away because they're 25 years old now and kind of launched. or we'd go to the beach and have a swim in the ocean, or maybe a kayak, that sort of thing. But probably she would like me to garden, but I probably would try to get out of that. Maybe cut the lawn. I could do that. But like to be outside in Gloucester, enjoying the outdoors in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. If it was a fall Sunday, I might be watching football. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's there you
That's
go.
fair.
What if it was a Tuesday?
Fall Tuesday, I would not be doing any of those things.
Hi, I'm Jenny Benedict. I'm the director of the Sawyer Free Library, and I'm very similar to Peggy and to Ben in that my work life is a lot of indoor time. It's a lot of computer screens, it's a lot of email, it's a lot of documents. So if I all of a sudden at noon am told that I'm free for the rest of the afternoon, it would be to head outside. I walk a lot. I like to ride my bike out to the beach and take a long walk on the beach, or get out on the water. Yeah.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Karen Risteban. I'm the program director for the Creative County Initiative at Essex County Community Foundation. And I also serve as the president of the Chamber of Commerce Board here in Cape Ann for this year. And it would be rare to have a full day starting at noon, so I'm with you, but I would check the weather first. It's very much weather dependent. So if the weather's beautiful and the tide is high and there's no wind, I'd get out my kayak. And otherwise, I'd stay home and read.
Nice.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for those introductions. Agreements.
Agreements.
All right, up next, before we start the discussion, we're going to go over a few guidelines on how to engage in this conversation. On the table, you have your agreements. We're going to go through them. Then I'm going to ask you if you would like to make any changes. We are all going to raise our hands to say that we will abide by them for the discussion, and then we will get started. Is there anyone who would like to read through the agreements? Out aloud. We're going to read them aloud, so we can go through. If anyone wants to volunteer to read, you can. If not, Don and I will go back and forth.
I'll read it.
I can.
We're both joining us.
Go ahead.
All right, get us started, Peggy.
Sure. We want people to feel invited to share but not compelled to, so we agree that it's okay to pass or pass for now if you prefer not to respond.
Perfect. Well, we're going to take turns. Sorry.
Okay. We don't want people to make assumptions about others' experiences, so we agree to speak for ourselves from our own experiences and not on behalf of a group or anyone else in the room. We will use I statements.
Thank you.
We want everyone to feel fully heard, so we agree not to interrupt or talk over each other.
Thank you.
We want you to feel free to speak about what is important or personal to you. So we agree that we will not repeat other people's stories outside of this meeting, although we are being video recorded.
Good point.
Yes.
We want there to be time for everyone to be heard, so we agree that when the plan assigns a preset amount of time to share, the facilitators will keep time and give a signal when the speaker has 30 seconds left, and we will honor these limits, those limits.
Want to finish off the last one?
Ask if there are people who have not read the book yet. Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. If you haven't read the book, it's okay to listen and respond perhaps at the end, but we'll allow people that have read the book to speak first.
Yes. Do we have any edits or amendments to these agreements? No? If you agree to abide by them, please raise your hand. Fantastic. Let's get this show on the road.
All right. Good. So we're going to start with our first question. We're ready to get into the heart of our conversation. I'm going to ask the first question, and then I'm going to give you a minute to gather your thoughts. We have paper and pens, so you can make notes if you'd like to. And then you get 2.5 minutes to share your response to the question. Maybe we'll start with you since you were last. We'll go counterclockwise. In between each person's sharing, we're going to take 3 breaths. Michelle and I will not participate. We will just be facilitators. We will not be contributing to the question. First question. What was a story or situation in the book that altered your previous understanding of slavery or its legacy? And what impact has that had on you?
Can you
Let me
repeat that?
give you a minute to gather your thoughts.
So could you repeat that as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm happy to repeat it. What was a story or situation in the book that altered your previous understanding of slavery or its legacy? What impact has that had on you? And you're welcome to pass, and we can come back to you. That's an option as well.
Okay, our thinking minute is about up. Then are you ready?
No.
Okay. That's all right. That's all
All I could think about
right.
was that I was going first.
Do you want us to come
Um,
back to you?
Please, if that would be
Okay.
okay.
That would be totally
All right.
okay.
Sorry,
Is
Jenny.
anyone, how about we just say, is anyone ready to share?
I'll dive in.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right.
I'll be brave.
I'll start your timer, Peggy, when you have 30 seconds left. I will raise my hand just to let you know.
Okay.
And then when you're all done, I will keep it up.
Yes. Yeah.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So I think for me personally, the book prompted me to reflect a lot on the economic transaction of slavery in it from whatever 1700 through the mid 1800s in the U.S. history, and to think about we so often uphold as sort of models of that time period people who amassed great wealth and built the United States, built infrastructure here in the United States. And to think about that in the context of the way that was done was based on slave labor. I hadn't thought about that as deeply as I did from reading this book. And I would say the impact of that was then it prompted me to start researching deeper into Gloucester's history to see what was sort of, and there's an excellent website called Cape Ann Slavery and Abolition that has a lot of information about the history here in Gloucester. And it also sort of revealed the perspective that anyone who was involved with shipping or trade during those years was in one way or another engaged in supporting slave trade, either directly or through either fishing and feeding slaves that were people who were enslaved on plantations, whether that was Suriname or the West Indies, also the southern U.S. So I think that was a new awareness for me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Take our 3 breaths.
Breathe.
Yes,
3
yes.
breaths.
Okay. Karen, you ready?
I think one of the main things that struck me was my preconceptions about the Civil War, and about the North and the South's role in the Civil War and the Confederacy's role. And how, I think it was the chapter on New York City, how that was raised up as we were the good guys, weren't we, up here in the North? And not so much, as the American Revolution, unfolded and trade increased and the financial markets started, were blooming, all of that need for cheap labor also increased north and south and everywhere. And so that was a bit of an awakening for me, thinking that the power structures upon which slavery, that slavery supported, for all those, for everywhere, and it was not just a problem of the deep South in the Confederacy during those war times. So that was an awakening for me. And the people, this may be a different question, but the role of the people and how the stories became, through this book and through history, stories are the actual monuments and memorials, and that concept was, to me, very deep, poetic, and very impactful, thinking about it in those terms. So.
Nice. Thank you. Breathe. Let's breathe first.
We're going to take 3 breaths first.
Okay.
I would say similarly, the things that struck me, one was just the overarching thing was how much we didn't learn, what we thought we knew, and then what was. I was a child of the 70s and the 80s, and that there a lot of this content wasn't part of what I say learned through school. And I think the big things were that, and also specifically chapter around just women and children, and how folks would father a child through slavery, and then that child would then be put into slavery, and just the specific experience for women that was highlighted in one of the particular chapters. And then I think the whole idea of, wasn't the North, weren't we the good guys, like you were saying, and that slavery wasn't above a certain line in the United States, which clearly it was. And, what does that mean? And, looking, like you said, at, how did that start? And New York, that chapter was interesting, just how it came about, and then for Indigenous people, and then through slavery, and how that, sort of built a certain part of New York. But then there was undesirable at the time housing set aside for folks to make a life, and then that all got taken away to build Central Park, and how it's just this like drumbeat of affront after affront, like even when folks have been given freedom, was it really freedom, and when did it happen? And it depended on where you were in the country and who told you you were free, and then what you thought you could do after that. So all of that was very eye-opening, I think.
Good. All right, 3 breaths.
Everybody get their 3 in?
Whenever you're ready, Bob.
Okay. When I was asked the question, I didn't feel as though slavery, there was anything really unexpected as far as slavery or its legacy in my mind, only because I try to read a lot on the topic, and Peggy and I were talking earlier, we were influenced by that series Roots. That was the first thing that just blew me away completely, as opposed to what we learned growing up in school. And so there wasn't anything totally unexpected, but there were some things that I really learned, as far as the impact of the South on the North. And the North was just as much involved, and they benefited as much or more than the South did when it came to slavery. basically the country was built on the back of slavery. So the other thing that really interested me was I just thought this author did a superb job. I thought he took a blank slate and he was interested in listening. He wasn't interested in spinning it in any way. It was really about listening and recording what he learned for all of us to learn. And I thought more than anything, is it Gorée? Is that how you pronounce it? Gorée Island? Mm-hmm. What was interesting to me was a well-respected museum director or tour guide, I think he was a museum director, had talked about 1 million slaves from that island being shipped over to the United States. And Clint Smith challenged that number and couldn't find anything to verify that many people had been shipped over. And so I appreciated the questioning of it. The bottom line was that it didn't matter if it was 10 or 1 million. The number didn't really matter, but I appreciated his search for the truth.
Great breath.
Thank you, Bob.
There's just so much I want to talk about and say about this book. And folks have touched on just a few of them. I would love to spend just a long time talking about Clint Smith's writing, which I think is incredible. But in terms of the question, for me also it was two things really. One, New York City. I spent a lot of time in New York City growing up because my father and stepmother lived there, and did not know until reading this book about slavery there, and did not know just some of the the structures and systems there that were so harmful. In terms of specific examples he gave us, did not know that about Central Park at all. And how especially folks like wealthier folks, privileged folks, like they often do, saw something they wanted, and that other folks had, and in this case, free African American people, and took it basically, thereby ending culture and families and lives and that sort of thing. And so, and the other piece that was I thought of just with this question was just the numbers. At one point in the beginning, I can't remember which chapter it was or which place. Talking about how the slave trade ended into the United States, I think in the early 1800s, but then the slave population still continued to grow exponentially over the next 50, 60 years. And that was, I didn't realize actually, I didn't remember that the international slave trade had ended, supposedly, but then also just how that didn't seem to matter at all. In fact, it grew and grew and grew and grew because of the slaves born, the children born into slavery, I should say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing on that first question.
Thanks, everyone.
Question number 2. What word has been passed to you about race and slavery? Would you like to disrupt or transform that legacy? If so, what are some steps you've taken or would like to take to do so? I'm going to read it again. What word has been passed to you about race and slavery? Would you like to disrupt or transform that legacy? If so, what are some steps you have taken or would like to take to do so? I'm going to think. Jenny, would you like to start us off again, or do you need a minute?
I could return a favor to you.
All right.
If you're ready, go ahead.
I wasn't
glad
sure if
you
you were
asked
going to be
for that.
ready.
I'm really glad you asked for that extra time. I love it. I love
Sure,
that.
thank you.
Yeah.
So in terms of the word that's passed to me about race, I mentioned my stepmother. In 1976, I was about 5 when my parents split, and we were growing up in Connecticut. My dad moved to New York City. And a few years later, he married Dr. Boydina Wilson, an African American woman who grew up in South Carolina. This is 1976, and she was a professor at Queens College City University of New York in Queens. And got a doctorate and was teaching about Islamic women. So a woman ahead of her time in many, many ways. And she was a big part of my growing up, and also her family was as well. So her mother, Essie, her sister, Loretta. And I was growing up in suburban Connecticut. So for me, I don't want to say it was normal, because what that means, but I learned pretty quickly that that race matters a lot, but also race doesn't matter a lot, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for learning that, especially where I grew up, because there's no reason I would learn that otherwise. So at the same time, the word that has been passed and is continuing to be passed, which I've heard and grew up with, and also grew up with, and live to this day, is that African Americans in our society are less than, and I could say terrible things that are passed on. The point I'm making is that, and then the other word that's passed is, folks should get over it, and there's some quotes in the book, but early on, about just the denial of race being a factor, and the denial of the legacy of slavery being a factor, and so that's the word that's also been passed to me again and again and again, and these days very strongly. And where I go because of my work very quickly is the schools. And what are we doing in the schools, our schools, but other schools in public education in America, to combat the words being passed now?
Thank you.
Thank you, Pen. 3 breaths. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I think this is a difficult question to distill into 2.5 minutes.
Yes, it is.
So in terms of context, in my early career, I taught freshman composition at the University of Houston, where my classes were a fourth Black, Hispanic, Asian, and white. And then in the mid-2000s, I worked in Hartford, Connecticut, where the population is approximately 35% Black American, 40% Hispanic, and 15% white. So I've spent a good deal of my career working in highly diverse communities. And when I was in Hartford, Connecticut, I think the most disturbing aspect was the increase in incarceration. And Clint Smith talks about it here. There's also an excellent Netflix documentary called Juneteenth that examines that rise in incarceration. And I think that is a hidden history, a hugely hidden history. So I would say much of my work in the public library sector is aimed at providing free and equal resources to knowledge through the library. And it is also to make sure that we have the knowledge resources at the library so that the broader community is informed about the histories.
Thank you.
Are you ready?
Okay. The word that I struggle with is race and the idea of racism. And I really appreciated how well he articulated some of that conundrum in this book. One of the things that stood out to me was the idea that racism is a social practice. It's what an actor does. It's an action or a rationale for action. And thinking about it that way, and thinking about race as not a passive construction, as he articulated, made me think, well, then how do we talk about, difference? How do we talk about different, skin color? What then do we, what words do we use, right? So, I mean, in the work that I do, we do a lot of grant making, and increasingly we're doing a lot of grant making to Black, Indigenous, people of color, African American, Asian Pacific, and that's how we've started to, that's how we describe those communities that we are supporting. And I don't know if that's right, either, but that's what we have. But the book made me think differently about how the idea of racism and the constructs that we've grown up with are the impetus to thinking about race as a thing. It's not a passive thing, but it's come from our actions. And where does that leave us as grant makers, as supporters of arts and culture, of all the things that we do? So it's a struggle for me, and it's a really interesting place to be. And this book really helped kind of focus some of my questions around that. So.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
The word that came up with me when the question was first asked was fairness, and that's why I've been involved in different things like this. I was taught early on, fairness is paramount. Simple concept, but you look at racism and slavery. That's just a clear example of gross unfairness. And there's plenty of unfairness to go around in this country and the world in a lot of different aspects, but not much has been worse than slavery and the racism that goes on still today. So that's been my, that was the first thing that struck me, and I guess what I've done is, for many, many years, 30 years, I've been involved with affordable housing, and currently the last 10, 11 years, I've been on the board of Harbor Light Homes, and we're focusing on providing homes for people that need them, people that are income restricted, and a lot of times those people are, blacks and minorities. And so, really proud of the work that we're doing at Harbor Light Homes. We have an executive director who's truly, he's got everything on the ball in so many ways, but on top of that, he's enlightened. And this very subject is really important to him and to our board, so I'm proud to be part of that. And we're doing great work and making a small dent in this problem. So that's my idea. But one other thing that I'll just quickly say is,
3 seconds.
I love going into East Veteran School and Beaman School and West Parish, reading stories for First Start to the kindergartners and the first graders. And so oftentimes you go in there, it's the color of the rainbow. It's just, it's kind of encouraging to me, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
3 breaths. Whenever you're ready, Peggy.
If I think back about how the word was passed, not really directly, but as a young kid, I grew up in a city just outside of Boston. My grandparents were immigrants. My parents grew up in the city. And I remember watching the news as a young kid and seeing the violence around busing. And it had a big impact on me because I couldn't understand it. And it was so scary to watch. And I think, you know, there's something about how jarring that was, because it's like, these are kids just like you, and they're just going to school. And so that had a big effect on me as a kid, because I spent a lot of time still in and around the city because all of my relatives were there. And so I think the one thing that broke through some of that noise at that time is my grandmother in particular, who was an immigrant herself, came over at 16, very young on her own, always had the most generous mind, spirit, kind woman. And, you know, she would just always talk about, you know, how does it matter, how we're all people and everyone should treat each other the way they want to be treated and all of that. And I think, you know, as you get older through the work, I've always worked in human services, focused on, you know, marginalized populations, particularly folks experiencing poverty. And you see it over and over again, you know, every data point you look at. Why is it that folks that are non-white versus white, why is it always worse? Every health indicator, every housing indicator, you know, it's like the impact of the history of slavery, how that fed into poverty, how that fed into certain policies and practices that have set us up in the way we are. It's not through personal failure, it's more systemic choices. And so, like with affordable housing, I guess the way that I try to disrupt it in our own work is when you hear people saying things that are basically very thinly shrouded comments that are really about, well, who's going to live there and where are these people coming from, you know, to try to use those moments to educate and open people's minds.
Thank you.
Rich sharing happening tonight.
So now
Yes.
we have a little time to discuss a little more openly and relaxedly and without as much time restriction. What we would like to do is look for 2 or 3 important points that have come up in our conversation so that we can kind of keep that for our records and chew on it for the next year, And also, we've been asked to come up with a question to ask Clint Smith when he comes virtually on September 10th to give his author talk. We have a panel of people who will pose these questions and comment on them too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our challenge now, and it's a little more loose and people can just chime in. So let's do 2 things. One, what are 2 or 3 points that came up today that you feel is poignant and something that you want to highlight? And then we'll come up with a question for Clint Smith.
We could have more than one question. We're not limiting.
Okay, good.
So if you've got a really one you're passionate about, please do share it.
Because our questions might be the best questions.
It might be.
It might be the best ones.
Exactly.
Right.
Good point, yeah.
Exactly. And we learned from our experience last year where we'll prep even more than we think we're going to go through in case there's time at the end, because we ran through them faster than we thought we would, and we were like, oh my goodness, that's it. That's all we have. So we will have a longer list this year in case time allots. We can even ask more questions to Clint. So, all right, you can start harvesting whenever you're ready in terms of themes.
Harvesting, I like
So I just want to be
that.
clear, I'm not checking email or surfing the web. I
Right.
took notes on my phone. Just be clear about that. I just want to
No
be
one's
clear.
judging you. No one's judging you.
I can see why you would, and you could actually, but
We
but I just
could,
want-
people do that,
right,
yeah.
Anyway, that's where my
No
notes, that's where
notifications
my
have
notes
come
are.
through. I
Right.
can vouch for you.
Okay.
It's not pinging.
Thank you.
No, it's not.
I thought it was interesting the way he ended the book, just talking about, he went through each, he talked about how there were many places to choose, how he chose certain places, but with each one, each experience, there's still a gap. He's just talking about
Yeah.
each one, so I think it just points out the educational aspect of it, that there's so much that's not passed along, and that even for him, after this whole experience, there remain these gaps. So I think, that seems like a place where we could focus on how do we bring more of these things into people's reality and kind of close some of those gaps, and the challenge that it brings, because some folks in certain parts of the country have certain fondness for nostalgic reasons related to family, and that it absolutely clashes with what the reality was. And
Right.
then there's on the human nature side, a desire not to believe that it wasn't the story they've been told all these years, and that it wasn't, and that it wasn't really about slavery, that it wasn't really about certain things. So I think part of that is to accept that is to accept a lot and all the shame that goes with it. So I felt like that's what he was doing a lot. Like, he had really great conversations with people who had very different perspectives, and trying to really get at, their point of view, and where does that come from, and where does that not connect with what certain things that are just factually known. So I thought that was a really big piece of this, because it is based on this, and how will we continue to try to pass the word collectively, individually, so that that historical knowledge starts to shift for people.
Really good point.
Very good point. Would anyone like to respond to what Peggy said, or build upon that, or change it?
I would just say, the point that she made, I had to write this down. History is what you need to know, and nostalgia is what you want to hear. I thought that was great, and that came through with the entire book.
Yeah.
I thought, and I would just say, congratulations to the racial justice team and your partners for putting this on, because in my mind, the important point is you're getting that word out, and the more you're educating people, the less ignorance there is. You can look at it that way, but it's great that we're doing this, and it's great that the word is getting out in so many ways, and that just has to continue. And appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd be interested to ask him, or ask ourselves, or ask experts what the psychosocial situation is between dehumanizing a person or a whole population of people, and utterly relying on them and their intellect and their ability to work, and learn and procreate at the same time. What is that made humans able to dehumanize other humans? What is the psychological or psychosocial construct, that allowed that to happen from, zillions of years ago? I mean, even before the American, experiment in it. But, what is that? What is that internal driver that allows that to happen?
I think that is so thought-provoking. Keeps happening. It keeps happening.
Yeah.
That was the basis of the Holocaust and Hitler's
Right.
views. It absolutely was the othering of the Jews and then a lot of other folks as well, right? LGBTQ folks and on and on. And then today,
Today.
much of our politics is about the very same thing.
Yeah.
Dehumanizing people, othering people. But what is your question? From what I heard was, what is about humans that makes us do this or makes us susceptible to other people, fooling us into believing that. But it'd be a lot for Clint Smith to have to answer that question. But I'd like to ask it to him. So I think that's very thought provoking. I might add something too. But boy, I don't know which one to add.
Oh,
There are a lot. Well, one thing I think which is a sort of a, I'll get to one that's a little more sort of concrete, but this one's a little more, I don't know, abstract maybe. This is on page 266 if anyone cares. Young Ada, and she was one of the students. She was one of the students from living on Goree Island, if I'm saying that correctly. She said, "We shouldn't forget slavery, but we can forgive." And I thought, first of all, wow. And then so then the question I have is, what are the ramifications and benefits of forgiving and not forgetting? So what are ramifications and benefits of forgiving and not forgetting? I don't know the answer to that question, but Ada really, for me, just struck a chord there. I think.
May I build on that?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Because I was very interested in the Goree section of this book. It's probably, it's one of the places that I haven't visited. I've been to many of the other places that he writes about. And I was interested in the transaction of Goree Island, because in order to purchase slaves, there also has to be a seller.
Mm-hmm.
And getting at this idea of forgiveness is you have to be able to identify who it is you're forgiving. And for me, that's where my mind went into, okay, this transaction that happened. Yes, there was a willing buyer to bring slaves across an ocean to a place they'd never been, and put them into a workforce and keep them there. But who were the sellers in African territories, and what were their motivations and benefits, and who how did they amass those people and get them on the ships to go? So I felt that piece of history was still a bit hidden, but I felt like they were part of, if you're going to at some point be able to lay the history to rest, that's a piece that would need to be known.
So like, what about their story, so to speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would love to add, so on page 199, I don't know who this was. It was a Galveston Island chapter, and she was talking about. Oh, I know. It was the woman who got the students involved in telling the history. I think it was, or interpreting the history of Juneteenth, or when the original recognition of Juneteenth, and she said that society doesn't give young people enough credit and doesn't engage them with the seriousness they deserve. She believes, and she said that she has proven in her work, that if you give young people the tools to make sense of their history, you're giving them the tools to make sense of themselves, thus fundamentally changing how they navigate the world. I would love to ask Clint Smith, why does he think people are so scared to give young people the tools to make sense of their history? Because there's so much, I believe there's so much of, we shouldn't teach that, we shouldn't teach that, we should teach this and not that. And I think fundamentally, folks are often worried about what kids might think or discover or learn. I'm not sure what they're afraid of, honestly. I really don't. I have no idea. But because they do just what she says. You know, they can make sense of their world, as complex as it has been, and it's up to us to, as they say in the book, you know, history is giving all the facts, and nostalgia is, you know, none of the facts, and memory somewhere in between. And so I really believe in the power of giving students all the facts and help them sort through the difficult things. Yeah. So the question for Clint would be, you know, why does he think people are scared of that or don't do that? What are they scared of? Yeah.
Just to make sure I'm getting the question.
Oh.
You would like to ask Clint why, what he thinks people are afraid of, why they're not giving all the facts.
Yeah, to specifically in education, for students, for younger people. Yeah.
Okay.
What are they afraid is going to happen? What are they? Yeah. What's yeah.
It seems sometimes fundamentally parents just want their kids to think what they think. Like they, you know, and a lot of these topics separate from this too, when they talk about teaching certain things in school, parents just want to have more control for, usually not for the better, but, and I think that's the whole reckoning with all of this is like, have we as a country really reckoned with our past? I don't think we have. I think the nostalgia piece comes in and people want it not to be some things, you know, as ugly as they really were. And instead of trying to sit with the discomfort of the ugly, it's like, well, it's like when someone said, well, weren't there nice, you know, in the book, you know, weren't there nice plantation owners? It's like, it's not possible. It's like an oxymoron. They're holding people like property and forcing labor and other things. So there's no version of that that's true, but people want to feel like, oh, there must have been some people. Which I think the Whitney versus Monticello example was really interesting. It's sort of like, how do you tell the story? And at the Whitney, how there's really a genuine attempt to tell more of the story and not highlight, isn't this building so lovely, you know? Which of course it's lovely architecturally, but that's not really, at Monticello, really the whole story at all. So I thought that was interesting too, just how do folks choose to tell the story and what do they leave out, you know, about what the reality was of living there and for everyone who lived there, not just the people in the big house, you know. So I thought the Whitney chapter was really interesting, and I thought it was interesting that he was telling folks in Africa about, well, there's this museum that does that, you know, like that, just kind of like that cross connection between countries as well. But I think that's it. I think people want to look past what is uncomfortable, unpleasant,
Right.
or might make them feel a sense of shame about their ancestors, you know.
Yeah, and I'm heartened to see that historic New England, with all of its historic homes, it owns 40 or 50 historic homes around New England. You know, it's now, they were always tourist destinations to see the beautiful homes and the china, right? And that's not the story anymore.
Wow.
You know, they're telling the actual stories about who lived there and who was held there and who did the work there, and the different kinds of, you know, living arrangements for different classes of people in those homes and all of that. So I'm really heartened by the fact that at least that's happening in New England, probably other parts of the country as well, but I think there is definitely a reckoning happening. How many folks are actually listening to it and you know, behind it is another story. And I know there's a lot of resistance to it, as there is taking the monuments down, the Confederate monuments. You know.
Well, it's interesting too, just when they looked at the visitor base at
Yeah.
both,
Yeah.
you know, predominantly white at Monticello, like becoming less so at the Whitney. So it's sort of like when folks are asking the question, well, why wouldn't people want to come here and see this? And again, not understanding that for folks who may have had ancestors that were slaves. This is not what people want to see, because again, it's not an accurate representation. It's not acknowledging the life that folks lived there, the contributions that were made toward why certain structures were even possible to exist. So that I thought was really interesting too, of sort of like who goes to see those, and what's the story they hear when they go there. Is it the complete story? Is it the partial story? And at Monticello, it sounded like, depending on what tour you picked, you got a more enhanced version or not, which I've never been to either place, so I just found that kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I did too. There was the one tour guide who basically told it like it was. And he was somebody who was in the service for 30 years, and he told it like it was. And at one point, Clint Smith thought that he was going to be softening up on Jefferson because the tour guide said that he gave gifts to his granddaughters. And Clint Smith at that point thinks, oh, okay, he's going to show the softer side of Jefferson. And those gifts were slaves. So it was the old, it was a great delivery. And he came up with what the real deal was. But to Peggy's point, you can take another tour on that very same property that gives the sanitized version of what happened there too. So just fascinating contrasts. It was interesting that in several of the different places, the Whitney, the prison, you heard the stories as they were, and you heard the cleaned up version. So still happening.
And every plantation tour in America, which is could be the Whitney. I mean, and if it's not the Whitney, then it's missing a whole gigantic piece of the history of that land. But people make choices.
You'll never go to a tour again without thinking about this, I think. Yeah.
All right. Now, we've done a good job of kind of harvesting our themes, and we have one official question thus far that Ben proposed. Any other questions?
There's another, I think, from Karen. What is psychosocial construct that allows people to dehumanize other people while also assimilating and depending upon? And,
Okay,
yeah.
I do have that. I
Yeah,
didn't
usually.
cross it around, highlight it. Okay, there we go.
You can solve that one, you can solve war.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's got to be a simple answer to that, I'm sure. somewhere.
Appropriating is the word I should have said. Appropriating, not assimilating.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Anything you'd like to share?
In general, or I've got a lot of
In
thoughts.
general, we're okay. Because we have two
free.
questions. I
Yeah.
want to make sure I
Oh, more questions?
let people
I'm
noodle
not always
a
good
little
with
bit.
questions. I'm always good with
Sure.
think
questions.
a little bit
Yeah.
if they have any additional questions, and then we can open it up just a little bit more because we do have a little bit of time to do a little bit more discussion if you guys would like
We
to.
go
Yeah,
until
When do we go until?
3?
I thought we were going until 2:30.
2:30 would make more sense.
Yeah, I thought we were going
Good.
until 2:30.
2:30.
Okay.
I think there's maybe an interesting question to him around, because he's an educator, and revisionist history is something that concerns us currently with current events that are happening in our country. And how does he view current events and the way those are captured and recorded, and what can be done to make sure that, yes, that they are fair and true to actual events rather than revisionist perspectives.
Huge challenge.
I'd be curious to.
So what would his recommendation be?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be curious to hear his thoughts on that.
Yeah, especially in the time of AI and social media and all of the other technical things that we have in our lives. Yeah, what is a
Well, there's also selective listening, right? Because you can find a channel anywhere that will tell you what aligns 100% with what you already think. So I think that's another piece is, you know, this is something I think people struggle to accept as it was. So you can just act like this is not real. And I listened on whatever XYZ channel on YouTube and they told me, you know, it was this, that, or the other. So I think that's a bigger challenge too. It's like people already kind of shut themselves out to different ideas or different points of view, you know, so how do you break through that to help people think differently about what they thought was known, that it might not be exactly how someone told you it was or what you read in a book before, and that things evolve. And I think we're just all like collectively starting to just go like this with information. And so especially something that is difficult to reconcile with maybe who you thought we were as a country from the time you were younger based on books you read or things you experienced or things people in your life told you. So I think that takes more of an effort, and I think people's effort is not there now to like explore different points of view about any topic, you know.
So that's the question, how could the word be passed now, given all of that?
Yeah.
You know, what's best? You know?
It's more
How can the
difficult because
word
it requires
Yeah.
multiple platforms,
Right.
and all,
Right.
you know, as compared to say, whatever, 20 years ago. It just seems like it's much harder to get people to think like, oh, gee, I might want to change my point of view on that. I used to think X, but I've taken in this new information and I'm shifting my thinking. I think it's hard for people to shift their thinking on
Where's the
things.
trust in it?
Yeah.
To actually be exposed to things that are counter to what they already believe.
Mhm.
And because of that exposure, that learning, that exposure,
Yeah.
then actually learn something different, learn something counter what they're bought into, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
I thought, I'm just going to read this from 289. There are a few different parts of the book where someone or Clint Smith himself seemed to just capture all of it. And this is a paragraph that I'll just read. It says, the history that I think is incredibly powerful. I think it sort of gets to the heart of what he was trying to do. And the history of slavery is the history of the United States. It was not peripheral to our founding. It was central to it. It is not irrelevant to our contemporary society. It created it. This history is in our soil. It is in our policies. And it must too be in our memories. Just, I read that, I noted that and I read it out loud because there's such a denial, I believe there's such a denial that the legacy of slavery either exists or it should still be impacting things. But when you add that to Jim Crow laws and redlining and housing and just say no, 3 strikes you're out, those are all the legacy of slavery. And so I feel like reading that and the economics of it all, as we described, the economics that founded this country and made it as wealthy as it is, they all come back. They really do come back to slavery and the benefits that this country and ourselves, and then how do we have more people learn that, accept it for what it is, but not in a way. And he also talks about not teaching in a way that causes despair, teaching in a way that helps to build something better. And and just I think you can't, and it's hard to. I believe it's hard to build something better if you're not honest about the way things are, and I think one of the way things from the arts, as he captured, and I agree with it, is just that slavery really is, whether I like to say it or not, it underpins so much what this country's become.
Yeah, well said.
And in good ways and in awful ways. Both, yeah.
Would that be a question for Clint? I'm wondering if the question
well,
about how do we pass the word now while not contributing to mountains of despair. I don't know if he has a thought about
Mountains of
that.
despair, or mountains of reaction, or mountains of anger.
Shame.
You know,
Yeah,
the
there are a
shame.
lot of
Right? Yeah,
emotions.
yeah, right.
But I think that's true until
You have to
you
have
go
some,
through that process, you can't
I would say.
go forward, you know. It's like
You gotta deal-
acknowledging things is hard for people, right? That's human nature, but I mean,
You
to
gotta feel-
culturally or collectively, like as a society, acknowledge it. I mean, some things have been done here and there, but it's like we're really not getting where we need to be, and I think that's the big block, because people can sort of say, oh, well, what's really the, you know, the whole, like, it's like a glossing over or shining up of something to make it not as bad as it was, because it's too hard for people to accept that that's who we were.
Right.
Whether it was before our time or whatnot, it's like that's who we were as a country. Those things happened, and it has had implications for many, many decades since, and I think that's just a hard thing for people to accept.
Mhm.
But it's real, and there's also people that like to deny. I'm sure there are people that deny slavery, just like there are people that deny the Holocaust and other things, but, you know, facts are facts, and I think that's where things kind of sit now. I think there's just a mixed, you know, not everyone's kind of on the same plane about what it was and what it wasn't, because there's still all these battles over symbolic things and not really like recognizing what that symbol means for other people.
Right.
You know,
right.
just because as a kid you were in some parade and that was the flag that was, it doesn't mean it's okay, it just means you didn't know, you know, but now that you know, you need to do better, you know.
Thank you. Is there a question in there? I just want to make sure. I'm not missing it.
We want Clint to give us the magic answer.
I don't think anyone has it, but if
Yeah.
the more we talk about it, we might get there.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it relates to this question of how do we teach this without feeling too much despair, and the question, but we have to kind of feel some of that crap, and we don't want to. If we got to feel
have to feel
uncomfortable, that's
something.
not really
Yeah.
a question, is it?
No,
Yeah.
no, it's okay. I was just confirming that I wasn't
Yeah.
missing one. We do have a few minutes left. Anyone else who hasn't shared that?
Just,
would like to?
you know, the whole idea of monuments is interesting to me because, you know, one time I remember thinking, okay, the Confederates, they represented what was wrong with this country, but having read a few books about the Civil War and whatnot, you know, Robert E. Lee was portrayed as a great general,
Yeah.
and you know, so many great generals with him, and other soldiers and whatnot. The Confederates were brave, and so the whole idea of the people grew up with these monuments, Robert E. Lee, Nathan Bedford Forrest, whoever it was, and that was culture to them. You know, they might have been great soldiers, but as Clint Smith pointed out, Robert E. Lee was not only a slaveholder, but in many cases a slaveholder who broke up families and could demonstrate cruelty. And so it's interesting to me that it's not a question, I guess, but I'd like to hear his thoughts on it. You know, the idea that removing these monuments to people that represented slavery and racism is a good thing, but it's also a cultural shock in many ways to people who grew up in the South, and in my mind has contributed greatly to the divisiveness in this country that we have today.
Can you reiterate your question one more time so I make sure I get it right?
Not really a question.
Okay.
But I'd just like to hear his thoughts on it. But
You would like to hear his thoughts on,
yeah, that's all.
removing the monuments and the
Yeah.
consequences of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. I don't want to
Right.
misrepresent
Words
you.
in my mouth.
So I just, what I heard was.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. Thank you.
I would just sort of, as a final comment also, add that there are other countries to look at in terms of their practices around reconciliation. So Canada, South Africa. And in many communities, and it's community by community, it is acknowledging the history from the beginning of time rather than starting the history with the colonial period. And if that is done systematically across communities, then the narrative starts to change.
Along those lines, he actually finishes the main part of the book by saying something that you made me think of. He says, at some point, it is no longer a question of whether we can learn this history, but whether we have the collective will to reckon with it. And I feel like that's what you're talking about is, will we reckon with it? Like Canada, I'm not familiar with how Canada has done this work, but I'm a little more familiar with how South Africa has. And but the word reckon with it, the phrase reckon with it really strikes me. Yeah.
Okay. On that note, I would like to thank everyone for coming and participating and reading the book and being part of this really rich discussion. So thank you, Karen, Jenny, and Bob, and Peggy. And just want to remind everyone that if you feel like chatting about it more, there are more discussion groups. You can go to the Fort Sawyer Free Library website and sign up. We'll be having them all the way up to the author's talk on September 10th with Clint Smith, and that will be at the Gloucester Stage Company. So we would love for you to participate in that as well if you are available. Hopefully one of these questions makes the list. I know the person making the list, so you've done a good shot.
I have a couple things too.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So we would like to ask if you might be willing and able to be part of a focus group in the fall to talk further about ways that we can move forward in our community. Would you be interested? Would you be willing? Let me just do a check.
Yeah.
Ben says yes.
Absolutely.
Maybe.
Of course.
Jenny
Absolutely.
says yes. Let me put you on the spot.
I was gonna chime in, but you owned up to it.
Karen.
Absolutely.
And you can always change your mind.
Yeah, we haven't picked a date yet or anything, so we will reach out to you at that time when
Checking
we have a date.
everyone.
Yes.
How can a retired guy say no when you're in schools and saying, yeah, I'll jump in October? Yeah, of course.
And the other thing is that
Yeah, I can
there's,
pass it around.
oh, you have
Yeah.
this. So she's going to pass around the QR code for you to do a little evaluation
Okay.
online.
Oh, did you like it? Did you not? Did you have enough time to speak? Did you not? We're constantly
So-
making edits and
Did a
tweaks,
great
and we'd
job.
like to
Yeah,
get
that's
you feedback.
wonderful. Yeah, it was great.
Okay,
Pass that around.
yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.